2025 was a turbulent year for Japan's entertainment and political world, as scandals ripped through once untouchable figures and institutions. From the shocking fall of beloved TV host Masahiro Nakai to the explosive revelations inside Johnny and Associates, the nation was forced to confront uncomfortable truths about power, silence, and abuse. Fuji TV's deep-rooted misconduct and a scandalous LDP party event only added fuel to the fire. This isn't just about celebrities, it's about systemic rot. If you're ready to uncover the real stories behind the headlines, hit subscribe and join us as we break it all down. The scandal that brought down Masahiro Nakai in early 2025 was the kind of story that seemed almost unthinkable just a few years ago. Nakai was one of the most beloved faces on Japanese television. A former member of the legendary idol group SMAP, he had successfully transitioned from pop stardom to become one of the country's most recognizable and trusted hosts. For decades, he represented consistency, professionalism, and an almost squeaky clean image. That image shattered overnight when allegations surfaced linking him to a sexual assault incident involving a female Fuji TV staff member during a private party in 2023. The story broke in January 2025, when a major weekly tabloid published details of a legal settlement between Nakai and the victim. According to the report, the woman had accused him of sexually assaulting her at an off-the-record industry party that took place in a luxury bar in Roppongi. She had stayed silent for over a year, afraid of the backlash and the enormous power imbalance. But when she finally came forward, her claims were backed by a disturbing combination of eyewitness accounts and text message exchanges. Rather than face a public trial, Nakai quietly agreed to a settlement reportedly worth 90 million yen. While he never admitted to violence, the payment was interpreted by the public as a tacit acknowledgement of wrongdoing. The fallout was immediate and explosive. Fans were stunned. Many of them had grown up watching Nakai, not just as an idol, but as the cheerful and often humorous host of variety shows and specials. His sudden disappearance from television was noticed instantly. But the deeper blow came when major corporations started pulling their advertising from Fuji TV, the station where he had built most of his second career. Brands like Toyota, Nissan, and Nintendo, which had long-standing sponsorship deals with the network, announced within days that they were suspending their campaigns until further notice. Some issued direct statements about their commitment to ethical behavior and zero tolerance for harassment. It didn't stop there. The scandal cracked open a much darker conversation about the internal culture at Fuji TV. Rumors had floated for years about the toxic atmosphere behind the scenes, but few had dared to speak out. Now, with the Nakai case dragging everything into the open, it became clear this wasn't just a single incident. In the days that followed, multiple anonymous staffers came forward to Japanese news outlets, revealing that harassment and inappropriate behavior were part of the culture, not exceptions. They described a work environment where power dynamics were routinely abused, and female employees often felt pressured to stay silent. By the end of January, the pressure on Fuji TV's executives became unbearable. First to fall was Koichi Minato, the chairman, who announced his resignation in a somber press conference. He apologized to the public and the staff, stating that the company had failed to uphold the standards expected of it. Shuji Kano, head of the board, followed shortly after. Both had attempted to ride out the crisis during the first few days, but advertisers, public opinion, and internal dissent made their positions impossible to defend. Their resignations were seen not just as personal accountability, but also as an admission that the rot went far deeper than Nakai's actions alone. As the scandal escalated, Fuji TV appointed an external investigative committee to look into the case and the broader culture of the company. The result was a damning 273-page report that detailed numerous cases of sexual misconduct and systemic failures. While Nakai's assault case had been the trigger, The investigation uncovered several other instances where complaints were ignored or downplayed by management. The report exposed a corporate structure where protecting talent and reputation came before the safety and dignity of staff. It also revealed that similar complaints had been made about other on-air personalities in previous years, but had been buried quietly. The Japanese public reacted with a mix of anger and disappointment. Social media exploded with commentary, with many users expressing heartbreak over Nakai's fall from grace. But there was also a growing sense of vindication among those who had long criticized the entertainment industry's closed-door nature. Feminist activists and labor rights groups seized the moment to call for industry-wide reforms. Even politicians weighed in, with several members of parliament urging networks to establish stronger protections for employees and ensure transparency in handling misconduct allegations. Nakai, for his part, released a carefully worded statement through his legal team. He expressed regret for causing trouble and distress, but stopped short of admitting guilt. He said he would step away from public life indefinitely and asked for privacy. The statement did little to calm the public. For many, it came across as evasive and insincere. His fan base, once among the most loyal in the country, fractured almost instantly. While a few diehards insisted on his innocence, the majority turned away, hurt by the betrayal and disappointed by the way he handled the aftermath. Fuji TV has since pledged to revamp its internal policies and establish an independent body to handle misconduct complaints. The network is also launching new employee training programs and setting up an anonymous reporting system, hoping to repair its battered reputation. But trust is hard to rebuild, and viewers remain skeptical. Advertisers, too, are cautious. Many have shifted their budgets to rival stations or digital platforms, signaling that the damage may take years to undo. The scandal marked a turning point for the Japanese entertainment industry. Nakai's case was not just about a single celebrity's fall from grace, but about a system that had shielded stars and executives for too long. For younger talents, especially women, it was a reminder that even the biggest names could be held accountable. For the audience, it was a sobering wake-up call that fame does not equal decency. As 2025 unfolds, the impact of this case continues to ripple outward, forcing an industry long resistant to change to finally confront its own darkness. The second scandal of 2025 wasn't about a celebrity, but it shook the entertainment world just as deeply. After the Masahiro Nakai case, all eyes turned to Fuji TV, the network at the center of the storm. What started as an individual accusation quickly snowballed into a full-blown institutional crisis. The audience wasn't just angry at Nakai. They were furious at the network for enabling the kind of environment that allowed such behavior to go unchecked. Advertisers pulled out by the dozens. Industry insiders began to whisper about deeper problems within the company. And before long, those whispers turned into reports. And those reports turned into resignations. At the heart of the scandal was the sense that Fuji TV had knowingly protected powerful figures within its ecosystem. For years, the network had been synonymous with high-end variety shows, primetime dramas, and star-making opportunities. But behind the glamour, it had become a place where complaints were routinely buried, where younger employees were told to keep their heads down, and where executives played favorites with on-air talent regardless of behavior. The Nakai incident blew that wide open. The week following his exit, an internal audit was launched. But public trust had already crumbled, so Fuji TV was forced to allow an independent committee to take the reins. This group consisted of lawyers, human rights advocates, and former media executives. Over the next month, they interviewed more than 200 current and former employees, dug through HR records, and reviewed complaints that had been previously dismissed or misfiled. What they found confirmed what many feared. The network had a systemic problem, one that stretched far beyond a single high-profile incident. The committee's final report, made public in late February, was devastating. It ran 273 pages long and included testimonies, timelines, and a breakdown of how complaints were handled or ignored. One woman, a former production assistant, described being groped by a producer during an overseas shoot. When she brought the issue to her supervisor, she was told that making trouble could affect her future in television. Another young male intern shared how he was forced to stay behind at wrap parties and serve drinks to older staff members, during which he was repeatedly made uncomfortable by inappropriate jokes and touches. There were dozens of stories like this, and the pattern was impossible to ignore. The reaction from the public was explosive. Protests were organized outside Fuji TV's headquarters in Tokyo. Petitions demanding sweeping changes gathered hundreds of thousands of signatures. Hashtags demanding reform trended for days. Shareholders were furious, not just over the ethical disaster, but the financial fallout. Stock prices dipped. Sponsors who hadn't already cut ties began issuing their own statements, some naming Fuji TV explicitly as a network they would no longer work with until significant reforms were made. In a desperate attempt to contain the damage, the company's board of directors scheduled an emergency press conference. Sitting in front of flashing cameras and a sea of reporters, top executives, including those who hadn't yet resigned, promised sweeping reform. Koichi Minato, who had stepped down just days earlier, returned to publicly apologize again, though his presence sparked more outrage than resolution. Shuji Kano, chairman of the board, took a more direct tone, admitting that the company had fallen short and pledging to rebuild trust. His resignation followed 2 hours later, live on air. The internal culture of Fuji TV became a case study in toxic corporate behavior. For decades, the station had operated on a strict hierarchy, with talent agents, senior producers, and longtime directors enjoying unchecked power. The few whistleblowers who had tried to speak out over the years had either been silenced or quietly transferred. Many said they'd long suspected something like this was coming, but had felt powerless to act. What made the scandal even more damning was the fact that Fuji TV had been one of the early targets of industry-wide reform discussions in Japan just a few years prior. After the initial reports about Johnny Kitagawa's abuse within the Johnny & Associates talent agency, several networks were warned to begin internal reviews of their own practices. Fuji TV had claimed to have conducted such a review, but when questioned, executives admitted that no formal measures had actually been implemented. That admission alone cost them a wave of advertiser trust that may never return. In the wake of the scandal, Fuji TV tried to regain its footing. Programming was altered, multiple shows were suspended, and several high-profile producers were either fired or quietly removed. New policies were announced, including mandatory harassment training for all staff, an independent ombudsman to handle employee complaints, and the creation of a hotline managed by a third-party law firm. These moves, though welcomed by some, were widely seen as too little, too late. Outside the walls of the company, the effect was more far-reaching. Competing networks began reviewing their own internal procedures. Talent agencies began hiring consultants to ensure their staff and artists weren't vulnerable to similar accusations. Even universities offering broadcasting and media degrees began updating their curricula, adding ethics training and gender sensitivity workshops to their programs. The message was clear. Business as usual would no longer be tolerated. For the Japanese public, the scandal left a bitter aftertaste. Viewers who had long been loyal to Fuji TV found themselves turning the channel or canceling subscriptions to its streaming service. Ratings dipped across the board. Longtime fans of variety shows like Smap Smap or Mecha Mecha Iketeru voiced their frustration online, saying the network had betrayed the very trust that made it a household name. Younger audiences, especially those engaged with social justice movements, and the number Me Too wave that had gained slow traction in Japan, saw the moment as a long overdue reckoning. While Masahiro Nakai had been the face of the initial fallout, the Fuji TV crisis was its own monster. It exposed how a massive entertainment machine, built on hierarchy and image, could become dangerous when left unchecked. The fact that it took public humiliation and a wave of resignations to prompt basic accountability only made things worse. By mid-year, Fuji TV launched a full rebranding campaign. Billboards appeared across Tokyo with slogans about change, transparency, and the future. A few shows quietly returned with new casts and behind-the-scenes teams. But even as the lights stayed on, the damage to the brand remained visible. For many, the legacy of Fuji TV had been rewritten. Not by its programming, but by its silence in the face of abuse. The real question became whether this would mark the beginning of a cleaner, more accountable era in Japanese media, or simply serve as another dark chapter, eventually brushed aside by the next scandal. The scandal surrounding Johnny and Associates that continued to haunt the Japanese entertainment world in 2025 was not new, but its impact refused to fade. What had initially been exposed in 2023 only grew more damning as victims kept coming forward, lawsuits piled up, and a long-standing culture of silence within the industry began to unravel. Johnny Kitagawa, the late founder of the agency, had been accused of sexually abusing countless young boys over decades. After his death, the truth began to emerge with force. But by 2025, it had taken on an even more explosive dimension. The issue was no longer about the crimes of one man, but about an entire system that had protected him and what that said about Japanese show business as a whole. The agency, once a powerhouse that created generations of boy bands and launched megastars, found itself in free fall. By the beginning of the year, more than 300 victims had come forward publicly. Their stories were horrifyingly similar. Most had been aspiring singers or trainees, boys between the ages of 12 and 16, recruited by the agency with dreams of fame. They were placed in dormitories or brought to Kitagawa's private residence for supposed training and mentorship. Instead, many said they were sexually abused repeatedly and told to stay silent if they wanted any chance at a career. When the story first broke, it was largely ignored by mainstream media, but an independent documentary released in late 2023 broke the silence and created a storm online. Public outrage swelled, and international outlets like the BBC and The Guardian began covering it, applying pressure that local networks could no longer dodge. In 2024, the Japanese government promised an investigation. By 2025, that investigation turned up damning findings. Not only had Kitagawa abused his power for decades, but many high-ranking officials, producers, and executives at the agency had known, or at least strongly suspected, what was going on. None of them intervened. As the year went on, victims began filing class action lawsuits. The legal strategy was coordinated and relentless. Attorneys representing hundreds of former trainees accused the agency of enabling systematic abuse and emotionally coercing their clients into silence. Several of these victims had gone on to have successful careers, but admitted that the trauma from their time as trainees had never healed. Others had quit the industry altogether, living with the emotional and psychological scars in private. The public testimonies were raw and painful, filled with emotion. For a country where victims of sexual abuse are often shamed or disbelieved, this outpouring was unprecedented. Johnny and Associates, desperate to contain the fallout, attempted to restructure. They rebranded under a new name, SMILEUP, and appointed a new president from outside the industry. But the damage was too deep. Many of the label's former stars cut ties with the company. Popular groups like Arashi and King and Prince either announced hiatuses or distanced themselves from the label entirely. Television stations and advertisers also began stepping back. Once, being a Johnny's talent guaranteed media exposure and corporate endorsements. Now, the brand had become radioactive. The backlash also reached Japan's parliament. Several lawmakers called for regulations that would prevent agencies from placing minors in unsupervised housing arrangements. They proposed stricter child protection laws and called for the creation of an independent body to monitor the entertainment industry. These proposals were debated heavily on national television, with victims and advocates appearing on talk shows to explain how the lack of oversight had enabled abuse for so long. A few older celebrities were even forced to explain why they hadn't spoken out sooner, leading to uncomfortable conversations about complicity and cowardice. The media, which had long played a role in enabling the culture of silence, also faced harsh criticism. For years, tabloid reporters had whispered about Kitagawa's behavior but never published. Television stations that aired Johnny's variety, shows, and music performances had turned a blind eye to rumors. Even after Kitagawa's death, some executives tried to steer coverage toward nostalgia and his contributions to pop culture, rather than his crimes. In 2025, that changed. The scandal had grown too big to ignore, and many news outlets were forced to issue statements acknowledging their past failures. Some went further and launched their own internal reviews to uncover whether journalists had been pressured to stay silent or had colluded with the agency. Fans, too, were deeply divided. For years, Johnny's idols had built intensely loyal fan bases. Many fans felt betrayed. Others struggled to reconcile the joy the music had brought them with the horror of the abuse behind it. Social media became a battleground. Some defended the current generation of idols, insisting they had nothing to do with Kitagawa's actions. Others demanded that all ties to the agency be severed. Hashtags calling for justice and reform trended for weeks, while others encouraged fans to support the victims by boycotting agency-backed merchandise and shows. Perhaps the most profound shift was cultural. In Japan, public discussion of sexual abuse, especially involving men and boys, has traditionally been taboo. Victims are often blamed and abusers protected. But the Johnny scandal broke those boundaries. Schools, universities, and even workplace HR departments began incorporating updated training on abuse prevention and reporting. Documentaries and books about the scandal became bestsellers, sparking conversations in households that might have once avoided such topics. Survivors from other industries also began speaking up, inspired by the courage of the Johnny's victims. By mid-2025, the agency's assets were being liquidated. Several senior figures were under investigation, not for abuse, but for cover-ups and obstruction. A portion of the agency's revenue was court-ordered to be placed into a victims' compensation fund. The boy band empire that once ruled Japanese pop culture had collapsed under the weight of its secrets. The country had lost more than just a talent agency. It had lost a symbol of national entertainment, and in doing so, it had gained a sobering lesson about the cost of silence. The scandal didn't end with one man or one lawsuit. It redefined what accountability meant in Japanese media. It changed the way talent agencies operated, and it exposed how deeply fame and abuse could intertwine when left unchecked. For the survivors, the fight was not over, but they had forced a reckoning no one could ignore anymore. The era of untouchable entertainment giants was gone, and in its place was a hard, painful truth finally being heard. In early 2024, a seemingly routine party held by a local chapter of Japan's ruling Liberal Democratic Party turned into a national controversy that refused to fade. By 2025, the fallout was still making headlines and sparking debates about ethics, image, and the deeply uncomfortable intersection between politics and entertainment. The event itself might not have made such waves if it weren't for the shocking footage that surfaced weeks later. Clips showing scantily clad dancers performing suggestive routines in front of an audience of high-ranking politicians, many of whom were seen clapping and laughing along. The footage spread like wildfire, and the backlash came hard and fast. The gathering had taken place in a private banquet hall in Tokyo and was organized to celebrate a fundraising milestone. Multiple LDP members, including lawmakers, city councilors, and well-known donors, were in attendance. While these parties were not uncommon, the presence of bikini-clad dancers performing in front of elected officials felt like a slap in the face to a public increasingly weary of elite detachment and tone-deaf displays of power. What angered people most wasn't just the act itself, but how casually it was treated by the attendees, who seemed completely unbothered by the optics of the moment. The video was first leaked by a whistleblower, a staff member who had attended the party and filmed it in secret. At first, only snippets made their way onto social media, but within hours, full clips were being shared by influencers and news outlets alike. The backlash was immediate. Politicians who had been in the video tried to downplay the event, claiming it was all in good fun and that the performers had been hired through a professional agency. But their explanations fell flat. People didn't want justifications, they wanted accountability. Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, who was not present at the party, issued a statement within 48 hours. In unusually blunt terms, he called the event unacceptable and deeply inappropriate, adding that public officials needed to maintain the trust of the people not only through policy, but through behavior. He demanded an internal review of the incident and urged the party to take disciplinary action. This marked a rare moment of direct rebuke from the top, and it quickly split the LDP between members who wanted to sweep it under the rug and those who recognized the public relations disaster it had become. Protests broke out in several cities. In Tokyo, university students organized demonstrations in front of LDP headquarters, waving signs that read, "Not our leaders," and "Respect the office." On talk shows and in opinion columns, the event became a symbol of how far some public officials had drifted from the people they were meant to represent. Women's rights groups condemned the event for reducing female performers to props in a political show. Even some longtime LDP supporters began questioning whether the party still held the moral authority to govern. What gave the scandal staying power was the way it dovetailed with broader frustrations in Japanese society. The country had been grappling with issues of political transparency, gender equality, and generational divides. Many young voters already felt disconnected from politics, viewing the LDP as out of touch and overly dominated by older men. The party's response to the scandal only deepened that sense of alienation. Some LDP members offered half-hearted apologies. Others refused to comment. A few went on the defensive, blaming the media for sensationalizing the footage or questioning the motives of the whistleblower. That only made things worse. In the months that followed, the internal investigation led to several resignations. 3 local officials stepped down, including the party chapter head who had organized the event. But no national figures faced direct consequences. This fueled accusations that the party was engaging in damage control, not genuine reform. Critics pointed out that the LDP had a long history of surviving scandals without real structural change. They argued that unless the party took steps to modernize and rebuild public trust, the next election could deliver a sharp rebuke. By early 2025, the LDP was still dealing with the aftershocks. Poll numbers showed a dip in approval ratings, particularly among younger voters and women. Opposition parties seized the moment to push for campaign ethics reforms and stricter codes of conduct for public officials. Some lawmakers proposed legislation that would require all political fundraising events to be documented and made available for review. Others called for stricter definitions of misconduct within government ranks, ensuring that even off-duty behavior could be held to a higher standard. The entertainment world watched closely too. Talent agencies and performers spoke out about being used in political events without full disclosure or safeguards. Some revealed that their agencies had received similar requests in the past and had turned them down, but noted that not everyone in the industry had the power to say no. The scandal forced a reckoning not only in politics, but in how entertainment and power had become quietly entangled behind closed doors. In the end, the Bikini Party scandal might not have involved violence or criminal acts, but it became one of the most talked about controversies of the year because of what it symbolized. It pulled back the curtain on a culture of entitlement that had festered in the upper ranks of Japanese politics. And it showed, once again, how a few minutes of video could unravel years of carefully curated public image. The damage wasn't just to the reputations of a few men in suits. It was to the very idea of what public service is supposed to look like. These scandals didn't just shake headlines. They shattered trust. What was once hidden behind fame, tradition, and political status came crashing into the public spotlight, exposing a culture in desperate need of reform. As victims speak out and the nation demands accountability, 2025 may be remembered not just for disgrace, but for long overdue change. These aren't isolated incidents. They reflect something deeper, and we're here to follow every twist. Don't miss our upcoming breakdowns as Japan's biggest secrets continue to unravel. Subscribe now and stay tuned for what's next.